Thank you very much. Thank you for the introduction. Thank you to all who are listening to me speak this morning. Well, for me, it's first thing in the morning. Good afternoon to the rest of the world. Very glad to be here, and thanks again for the opportunity, and to the organizers for pivoting and getting us all connected virtually. So yes, as you introduced, my talk today is on the ethical ramifications of snake accessorization and confronting the usage of snakes and their skins in the fashion system. At the 2001 MTV Video Music Awards, Britney Spears performed her song, "I'm a Slave for You," with a 2-meter long, 12-kilogram albino Bernese python on her shoulders. Outfitted with a head-worn microphone, Spears stretched the length of the snake with her hands to create a silhouette that would become iconic of her legacy as an entertainer. She danced across the stage, spinning several times, navigating between her many dancers, with the snake outstretched. Fake thunder crashed and lights flashed to mimic lightning. Smoke shot up from around the stage. At one point, the snake's head lowers and Spears knocked it with her hip. 2 decades have passed, and this performance and the snake named Banana are still talked about in American popular culture. Not only is the performance still talked about, but the trendiness of the snake as accessory remains prevalent at the MTV Video Music Awards, the VMAs in particular. In 2011, Justin Bieber brought a young albino boa constrictor to the awards show. He would auction the snake off only a couple of months later. In 2014, a boa constrictor bit one of Nicki Minaj's backup dancers during rehearsals for the show. Herpetologist David Steen wrote about the likely circumstances for this bite as, quote, "Being on stage can be a stressful experience for people. Can you imagine what it's like for an animal that has no idea what's going on, with the noise, the lights, and rapid movements? You can expect any animal to attempt to defend itself when it feels threatened, and that was undoubtedly the case with this particular boa constrictor." Finally, at the 2019 MTV Video Music Awards, 2 attendees walked the red carpet, each wearing a snake. USA Today declared a, quote, "VMA's snake trend." One of these 2019 attendees, singer Her, pictured on the left, proclaimed her ball python to be, quote, "the perfect accessory," end quote, and explained that she wore the snake to pay homage to Britney Spears. Though Banana is often described and written about as an iconic performer, Banana did not have a choice about performing. Banana was restrained such that she could not express bodily autonomy, perhaps the most basic allowance that should be granted to a non-human, but certainly which is not the case with animals used in any number of industries. Were Spears not tightly grasping Banana, as this Gucci model is seen doing in the image on the right, it's reasonable to expect that Banana might have chosen to retreat from this cacophony of vibrations, the confusing flashing lights, and the woman who was slinging her around. Omitting Spears's performance from a discussion of snakes as accessories would be careless, because she catalyzed a phenomenon that persists many years later. The line between fashion and entertainment has long been thin. Spears's performance and its many subsequent red carpet emulations and runway emulations are situated within the idea of a fashion system, which connects runway fashions, celebrity endorsements, and the trends adopted by consumers. For example, wearing live snakes as accessories has swelled in popularity to the point of establishing rental markets for live reptiles. Businesses in United States metro centers like Atlanta, Los Angeles, and New York City rent snakes and other reptiles for use in photo shoots, music videos, runway shows, corporate events. We should consider how snakes' sensory abilities would be affected by a given quote-unquote performance environment, and how restraint would certainly limit snakes' natural behavioral responses to the stress of those environments. I will also discuss snakeskin leather here as a distinct form of accessory, which plainly and unabashedly glamorizes and appraises snake death in great quantity. Snakes are beautiful enough that their skins are prized in luxury fashion, and yet they are often feared in their complete living bodies. Does wearing the skin or wearing the body of a passivized, quote unquote, menacing animal, especially as a superfluous luxury accessory, serve a latently dominative function? Do we fear only agential snakes, free snakes? Does revoking snake agency through the processes of this fashion system help humans maintain feelings of dominance over nature? Whether they appear alive or dead, the snake's non-consensual appearance on a runway, red carpet, or stage trivializes and passivizes the snake. First, I'll review some studies of snake behavior to further elaborate on why using snake bodies in fashion performances is very likely stressful, which should raise concerns about the popularity of this practice. It is difficult, though, to imagine a snake's lived experience in our shared world, given how disparate the snake body and human body are. This difference may also present barriers to designing experiments and ethograms for measuring and interpreting snake behavior, which could in turn broaden our understanding of snakes' mental lives and help us be better advocates for them. It is known, however, that snakes are remarkably sensitive to many stimuli. Though they are earless and don't hear airborne sounds in the same way that humans do, snakes are able to hear through vibration. Snakes are also sensitive to temperature changes, and they use their tongues to explore their surroundings. And you can see the snake in this photo is doing just that as he's taken down a runway. Finally, some species of snake are diurnal, while others are nocturnal, meaning their needs for routine can greatly vary. And though these findings are taxonomically broad, they provide a starting place for thinking about how different snakes would experience the world in different ways. And there is little in the scholarly literature related to stress responses in snakes specifically due to anthropogenic or human contact. And I'll say I started doing this research 2 years ago, and I reached out to snake behavior experts, members of the academy who are working in a number of disciplines on topics related to snake behavior. And when I contacted them in the initial stages of this research and kind of introduced, I'm starting with Britney Spears, but I'm kind of opening and looking at fashion systems more generally, while they were enthusiastic and supportive of this research and found it, interesting and relevant, as I was looking for topics on, how snakes might be stressed due to human contact, they shared they weren't really sure about much of anything out there, kind of related to specifically performance environment, or as I'll proceed to talk about, how that could be kind of extrapolated and taken into the slaughterhouse environment where snakes are slaughtered for skin. So there is little out there related to how snakes respond to stress from humans, though of course there's plenty of the inverse, looking at human fear responses due to snake encounters. We know, though, from looking at studies, other interspecies studies of snakes in interactions with other species, other predator species to them, that they exhibit a number of defensive behaviors. These behaviors include freezing, fleeing, striking, faking their deaths, flattening, writhing, and balling up to protect their heads. Relatedly, if a reptile is in pain, they may show avoidance behaviors or they may act aggressively. In one of the only studies to be found which considered snake encounters with humans from the snake's perspective, more or less, researchers measured behavioral responses of free-ranging cottonmouth snakes in encounters with humans. I should briefly say this study was done in my home state where I live now and where I grew up, which is North Carolina on the east coast of the United States, not far from where I am now. And cottonmouth snakes here in our state are often killed, or other non-venomous snakes are mistaken for cottonmouths and are killed because they are mistaken for being these fearsome venomous snakes. Just yesterday, I was scrolling through Facebook and I saw a thread of photos of people bragging about cottonmouths they killed, with graphic photos of mutilated bodies. And the reactions were almost entirely positive, congratulatory. There's an adage here in North Carolina, and I'm quite sure it's elsewhere. I'm sure it's been translated into many languages, that the sentiment is basically the only good snake is a dead snake. And that was also repeated throughout this thread of photos. So as I return to consider this cottonmouth study, here in this case, the researchers found a dominant preference for these snakes to flee or otherwise use defensive tactics before they resorted to biting a fake hand that was presented in the enclosure. So it makes me think and consider about the killings of these snakes I just saw on Facebook in a new way, and whether they were unable to flee or whether they showed other defensive tactics that went ignored. And again, though these are regrettably limited in scope and in specificity, I think these combined findings suggest and indicate what most of us probably already knew, what we already expected, that snakes prefer to flee when given the option. But of the list of defensive behaviors, including fleeing, that I mentioned before, many, if not all, are made impossible when a snake is tightly restrained, purposefully positioned. Furthermore, we know that snakes are able to perceive sound through vibrations that they feel sometimes throughout their entire skeleton. Loud music on a runway at a VMA's performance would vibrate at a frequency that could potentially overwhelm a snake's senses. With all of this said, though, with all of this that I've presented, the burden of proof, though, should not be on the snake. It should not be required that humans are able to perceive signs of stress through a snake's observable behavior. It's not on them, it's on us. Non-humans should not need to prove stress to humans in order to justify their humane treatment. And now as we move from thinking about living snakes to thinking about snakes killed within the fashion system for their skins, killing a snake for their skin blatantly and arguably revokes any sense of bodily autonomy. The gruesome reality is that snakes, mostly pythons, are skinned alive by the hundreds of thousands each year. Because snakes have slow metabolisms, they might live for days without skin, dying slowly of dehydration. Though snakes do shed their skins, this skin is too thin for use in clothing or accessories, so snakes must be killed for their skins to be harvested. In order to loosen the skin to facilitate collection, snakes may first be starved, then forcibly pumped with water. They might be starved for very long periods, and they're pumped with water. In other cases, they tape the anus and the mouth shut and use an air pump to pump the snakes with air. Clifford Warwick, a biologist and a former snake farm investigator, describes cramped conditions in snake farms where pythons can barely uncoil in tiny drawers in dark warehouses with drawers stacked on top of each other. Snakes are hunted and captured in the wild, yes, or they might be reared from birth in these farms, and these farms are becoming more common. Gucci's new python farm, for example, which the company claimed would raise snakes in, quote, the best conditions for animals, farmers, and the ecosystem, end quote, is thought to drown its snakes in crates, which Warwick clarifies as no more humane than other common methods of slaughter, such as nailing snakes to trees by their heads. I'm sorry for my dogs barking in the background. I'm sure they've seen a squirrel, and I hope this wouldn't happen, but alas, it has. Hopefully you can still hear me. Now, while the painful deaths of individual snakes alone is quite shocking, it should spur resistance. This alone should spur resistance to purchasing and wearing snake skins. There's also the issue of conserving wild snake populations and their ecosystems, and of course, concerns regarding the unsustainability of snakeskin fashions. According to Warwick, again, and granted this is an interview he took about 8 years ago, so things could have changed in either direction. He's quoted as saying, "We are seeing smaller and smaller snakes caught, and hunters having to travel across wider areas. Classic signs of species in decline." And again, while I've talked about how painful, how absolutely painful these deaths must be, and while I don't think at this conference with folks like us who are advocates for animals, I don't think I need to come here to prove or try to convince you that snakes and reptiles, that they feel pain. I don't think I need to do that here, but I do wonder more generally, are snakes widely viewed as experiencing pain in the same way that mammals are? And I'm not sure that's the case. Myths and misinformation pertaining to pain sensation are disturbing because they perpetuate acceptance of inhumane treatment. We also see them impacting legislation decisions. And until somewhat recently, even some veterinarians did not treat reptiles as capable of feeling pain. I found some papers in veterinary journals published within my lifetime that were kind of papers taking this revelation, oh yes, reptiles do feel pain. Hey, other veterinarians, take note. Maybe we should anesthetize them or otherwise manage their pain when we're performing procedures. Some of these were from early 2000s, late 1990s. Before they, I think one method that they used was if a snake needed to come in for a procedure, they would put that snake or put this other reptile into a refrigerator to lower their body temperature and put them into a state kind of like torpor, and then proceed with the procedure, rather than, again, using anesthesia or treating them as if they'd be able to feel pain during or after the procedure. And if the widely held perception is that the victims, in any case, are immune or less sensitive to pain, it's more difficult to stir empathy for them. Finally, I introduced my theory that I am still working through. It's an idea that trivializing the snake within the fashion system carries a distinct symbolic value related to the cultural significance of the snake in Western symbolism being summarized as evil and duplicitous. And popular culture continues to feed associations of snakes as evil. Motivating factors for wearing snakeskin could be due to any number of compounding factors and influences. For example, on this previous slide, I presented Kim Kardashian and I presented her without any introduction or with any comment because I hardly feel it's necessary. We know that she is someone who has amassed an incredible amount of symbolic capital, social capital, cultural capital. She is both of the fashion industry and she is an integral part of the fashion industry as someone who is influential, who affects trends. And so having any number of photos I could have taken to present this person who is followed all over the world, wearing incredible lengths, however many individual snakes she's wearing in these cases, they're seen by millions of eyes. And so as I think about compounding factors, compounding influences, I'm thinking about things like symbolic capital and fashion influencers and how fashion influencers appear to be the wave of the future, and how these can impact decisions for people to buy and wear products that may not be ethical, may not be ethically sourced. But considering these compounding factors and influences, I also want to consider alongside this the strange dissociation of shunning snakes as evil, but spending lavishly to wear their skin. It needs hardly be said that wearing skins of other beings is an inherently dominative practice because it presupposes the importance of one's aesthetic preferences over non-human life itself. Now, yes, with cow leather, one can make the argument, we've probably heard it, the argument for durability and comfort. With fur or down feathers, one can argue for warmth and insulation that's provided, but snakeskin does not serve any functional purpose for its human wearers, though of course it's quite functional for snakes. In fact, it's very delicate and fragile, in addition to being quite expensive, with one leather care company encouraging owners of their goods to clean and condition the skin 2 to 3 times per year. So it's not particularly functional or durable and requires, in fact, maintenance to maintain it. And while the opulence performed through wearing snakeskin is well proven, the trivialization of snake life perpetuated by the fashion system may also serve a dominative function that is specific to snakes as a taxa, based on beliefs that snakes are inherently dangerous to humans and thus deserve death, even humiliation after death, by how they're trivialized and worn. I ground this idea in studies of sadism in nature. And now I don't suggest that overt sadism is the primary motivation for consumers to wear snakeskin. However, I introduce this idea to illustrate how dominative practices can manifest in latent and overlapping ways, as potentially influenced by cultural symbolisms of vilified non-human animals. The methods by which snakes are slaughtered for their skins, their bodies mutilated when they are still alive, juxtaposed with the pleasure derived from wearing them, may be its own form of sadistic structure. In their chapter on animal justice as non-domination, Giraud and Saussure-Bouffard cite Francione and Charlton, quote, justifying an activity that involves pain for sentient beings by the pleasure it procures is morally equivalent to justifying the action of a sadist who enjoys torturing animals by the satisfaction derived from it. How could any of these practices be considered necessary? Now, I'm glad to say that since I first started doing this research and first put this paper together in 2019, we have seen some positive change. Global trade in raw reptile skins decreased 1.88% between 2018 and 2019, which is the most recent year for which those compiled statistics were available, went from 301 million to 295 million US dollars. Now, while these figures are generalized, again, to include all reptile leather, including snakes, it is a positive sign alongside major luxury companies and department stores also now banning exotic reptile skins. I should say, however, that I offer these figures with a caveat that is symptomatic of the reptile skin industry's problems with transparency and tracking. According to the Animal Welfare Institute, trade in reptile skins is largely unregulated, which leads to challenges in tracking trade and determining which reptile taxa, let alone which species, are represented in certain numbers. It is also thought that the illegal trade in reptile skins at least matches the legal trade in scale, if not surpasses it. And as I looked further into this data set, for instance, this 301 million US dollar figure, I noted that no Southeast Asian countries were listed as top exporters. They were quite low on the list, actually, though the snake trade in this region, especially for pythons, is very well established and has been growing in the recent decade. And this decline in demand for reptile skins has met surprising controversy. Surprising controversy from prominent conservationists who argue essentially that decreased demand for snake skins will decrease support for their conservation. They also state that animal rights organizations and activists who oppose snakeskin leathers are acting emotionally, are acting based on ideologies, rather than based on science and evidence, which they pose as mutually exclusive. The message here is we should only conserve snakes insofar as we can use them, which opens wide, messy conversations about conservation ethics. Thinking beyond the logical fallacy of false choice presented in this last quote, that we would seem to prefer species go extinct rather than be utilized, to me that appears to be an egregious logical fallacy, as if those are the only choices that we have. But thinking with this, but also thinking beyond it, what are the ethical ramifications of conserving animals only to use them? To breed and keep them alive, often in deplorable conditions where welfare is not paid any attention to, only until their bodies are maximally useful. Are extinction and utilization really the only possible futures for snakes? How can and how should conservation ethics evolve beyond what is quantifiable at the population level to consider individual lives and the quality of those lives? Now, I make no effort to dispel the claims of the IUCN about snake conservation being tied to the fashion industry. Of course, breeding efforts in snake farms will increase those snake species' overall numbers. However, I challenge how we would measure conservation success in this case and ask, for whom is this success? Who benefits and who should benefit? Now, though, here, and thank you for staying with me as I kind of meandered my way and through a work that's still in progress, with organization being one of the challenges that I'm trying to kind of seek out here through this presentation and through writing the longer manuscript, though. Here I organized living and dead snakes mostly separately. I wish to emphasize here as I conclude that the snake as accessory in either case is trivialized and passivized, whether alive or dead. Alongside, Britney Spears catalyzed a phenomenon of accessorizing with live snakes. Alongside this commodification of snakes' living bodies, the skin of dead snakes is still prized in luxury fashion. Investment by established fashion houses like Gucci in facilities and recent research projecting growth in the snake farming industry indicates snakeskin is here to stay. It remains to be seen, too, if live snakes maintain their niche in fashion entertainment. A snake is not a trend, nor a length of leather. They are a sentient individual. They feel pain, pleasure, anxiety, and a range of other emotions, and this is not ideology, this is science. Regardless of proving sentience, snakes deserve our moral consideration and to go about the world as agents of their own bodies. Thank you.